I've been doing cyanotype printing for way over 5 years now, and in that time I've made not only a lot of prints but also a lot of mistakes. So in this video I want to share with you everything I've learned in 5 years of cyanotype printing. I'm going to go over the basics of cyanotype printing, the setup I've used over the past couple of years, how to print on fabric or even glass, and a whole plethora of other tips, tricks and techniques. But let's start at the beginning. Cyanotype printing is one of the earliest photographic processes, developed by Sir John Herschel in 1842. In its early days, it has been used to document plant life and create blueprints. You can print on paper, fabric, wood, or even glass. And even though the Prussian blue is what cyanotypes are typically known for, there's a plethora of ways to tone your prints using household ingredients such as coffee or tea. You only need 3 things to create a cyanotype: the emulsion, something to put the emulsion on, and a subject. As for the emulsion, you have several different options. The easiest is using pre-coated paper. An alternative to that is using a cyanotype kit like the one by Jacquard that I'm going to use today. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you have loads of possibilities in terms of what to print on, but more on that later in the video. As subject for our print today, I'm going to use a negative of some of my digital photographs. Now I want to start by showing you how I prepare my digital photographs to use as negatives for cyanotype printing. And the first thing you want to make sure is that the file you work in has at least 300 dpi. If you have a printer that can do 600 or 1200 dpi, it is worth to up that to what your printer can do. But my printer only can handle 300 dpi, so that's what we're gonna work in. I've prepared a picture of mine here, and the first thing you want to do is turn it into black and white. For that, I'm just gonna reduce the saturation to 0. Next thing you want to do is turn it into a negative. For that, I'm just gonna adjust the curves so we have a line going straight from top left to bottom right. Now, this image here is ready to go, but you really want to make sure that what you want to have white in your final print really is black. If this would not be the case, if it would be just some shade of maybe darker gray, you could also adjust the curves here. On the other hand, if you want something to be really black, you want it to be completely white here in the negative, and if that's not the case, you could also adjust that here in the curves. But as I said, this is the negative that I'm going to use today. I've prepared a few more here just to do some test prints, and maybe you see some variety in the kind of subject that you can print with cyanotype. After I've printed out the negative on some transparent film, I will now mix the emulsion. For that, I'm using 2 very cheap pipettes. In that way, I'm able to only mix a few milliliters of emulsion. This will be enough to coat 1 or 2 sheets of paper. For coating, I'm using sticky tape to fix my paper to the table. After that, I'm using a spongy brush to apply the emulsion evenly. If you want brush strokes to show up in your print to give it a kind of painterly look, you can also use a normal paintbrush. After the paper is coated, I'm going to let it sit until it's dry to the touch. Only then, I'm going to start placing my negative on the paper. To hold everything down and ensure sharp edges, I'm going to place a piece of glass together with some weights on the negative. Now, when it comes to exposure, you have 2 options: natural or artificial light. Personally, I mostly use artificial light because once set up, it's just way more convenient. Speaking of setup, let me show you the setup that I've come to use over the past couple of years. The core of my setup and the device I use most often is my exposure box. On the lid of the box, I mounted these UV LED strips. These allow me to expose my prints no matter the weather or time of day. giving me a reliable exposure every time. If you want to build something like that yourself, I personally use UV LED strips with a wavelength between 395 to 400 nanometers, containing 60 LEDs a meter. I just used scissors to cut them to the right length and then glued them onto the wooden board. Although I used a soldering iron to connect the individual strips, you can also just get these LED connectors and use those. As you can see, the box is not connected to the lid. This allows me to use the lid on its own, giving me more space and freedom in arranging my transparency. In this example, all the transparencies on the bottom would not fit in the box. But if I can, I do try to arrange everything inside the exposure box. That way, I don't need to worry about accidentally moving my transparencies during the exposure, and on top of that, I get some free eye protection. As you've seen before, I use a lot of other things to improve my prints. Most important, 2 panes of glass and some weights. I use these to press the transparency against the coated paper. You could also use a contact printing frame or some standard picture frame to achieve similar results. The weights are necessary because the light of the LED strips is very soft, meaning if there is a gap between the transparency and the coated paper, the print is not going to be sharp. At this stage, we are now ready for printing. I'm going to use my little box here to expose the image, but you can just use the sun for exposure as well. Just experiment a bit and follow the instructions in the packaging of your Cyanotype kit. After exposing your paper to UV light, it's now time to develop the print and tap water. And this will be the first time you can see your print. Rinse it carefully and then put it somewhere to dry. Now, making your first print might not work out the way you want. So let me share some of the mistakes that I've made over the years so you can avoid them when making your next Cyanotype print. So let's get right into it with mistake number 1, choosing the wrong paper. When I started out with Cyanotype printing, the first kind of paper I tried was high quality printer paper. But I quickly came to realize that using this kind of paper had one major issue. The emulsion gets absorbed way too much. As you can see, after coating, the emulsion even made its way under the masking tape, resulting in very ugly and uneven edges. But that's not even the worst problem. When it came to developing the printer paper, I wasn't able to wash out the unexposed emulsion completely, leaving me with a just terrible print. So if this print does look like anything you've produced in the past, you have to use a different kind of paper. Or more specifically, you have to use watercolor paper. Now, there are definitely some different brands of watercolor paper that work better than others, so I recommend to try a variety of different manufacturers to get the best result. Now, if you liked the video so far, maybe consider liking and subscribing. But let's continue with mistake number 3, a poor printing setup. If you have done some Cyanotype printing before, you might have realized that sometimes there are areas in your print that aren't as sharp as other parts of the image. The reason for that is that your subject is not touching the emulsion, resulting in very soft edges. All we need to solve this problem is some glass panes and some weights. In my case, I bought some dollar store picture frames and used their glass in combination with some pieces of steel. I wouldn't recommend using the glass of expensive or gallery grade picture frames, as that kind of glass is often UV absorbent. Using the glass and the weights, you'll be able to expose prints that are sharp from one corner to the other. Speaking about exposure, that brings us to mistake number 4, using the wrong exposure time. Now, there are multiple different factors that influence your exposure time, from the material you print on, of the emulsion to the light source. All these things might prolong or shorten your exposure time. If you choose wrong, you might end up with prints that are either completely blue or look like empty sheets of paper. The easiest way to figure out the exposure time is by looking at the color of your print during exposure. The print is fully exposed when it has a nice bronze-like color. Although this technique does work quite well if you want to print on a colored or transparent base or just need something more precise in general, you need a more reliable way to test your exposure. And the best way to get a more exact measurement is by making an exposure test strip. To do that, you only need 3 things. First, a coated piece of the material you want to print on, in my case, paper. Second, the subject you want to print, i.e. a transparency or some leaves. And third, a black piece of cardboard. Place the coated paper and the transparencies like you would with any standard print. Then add the aforementioned glass panes and weights. Before you start your exposure though, you want to cover a big part of your print using the black cardboard. When you have arranged everything like you see on screen, it's time to expose the test strip to UV light. During the exposure, you want to move the piece of cardboard every 5 minutes or so, revealing another part of your coated paper. Make sure you move the cardboard enough, otherwise it's going to be tough to identify the right exposure time. However, when you've uncovered the whole test strip, give it another 5 minutes of exposure and then move on to development. After that, you'll be able to see the effects of different exposure times on the test strip. In my case, the area on the far right is representing an exposure time of about 5 minutes. The one next to it is 10 minutes, after that 15, and then 20 minutes of exposure time. Now, it's just a matter of selecting the area you like most, and that's the exposure time you're going to use for your future prints. Before you are able to do that though, make sure your print is fully oxidized. You can do this by either waiting 24 hours or by submerging your print in a mild solution of hydrogen peroxide. In my case, I'd say 10 minutes is about perfect. You don't want to miss the last step when making cyanotype prints, because doing this will transform your cyanotype print from something that looks like you've made it in your kitchen sink to a true art print. Let's get right into it. I've already prepared some exposed prints here. All that's left to do is to develop them in some tap water and then put them to dry. Now, no matter if you just hang the print over your sink or use a clothing rack or a development tray, like I typically do, when they are dry they are probably gonna be nice prints, but sometimes they are still going to be a bit wrinkly or deformed. And a small trick I want to share with you today is about removing those deformities, elevating the quality of your print just that bit more. All you need is a piece of fabric and a clothing iron. I start out by putting my print on the ironing board and then cover the print with the aforementioned piece of fabric. This will just give me some added protection and make sure that I don't accidentally burn the paper. After that, I iron the print like I do on a regular shirt. Now, depending on how wrinkly your print is and how delicate the paper is that you use, you might start on a medium setting, and if that's not enough, work your way up to the highest setting. If there are still some wrinkles left, you might even use some steam to get everything nice and flat. After doing that with all the prints I've prepared previously, I now have perfectly flat images that are perfect to use as postcards or gift cards. So, now that you know how to make the perfect Cyanotype print on paper, let's take a look at something a little bit more advanced, printing on fabric or even glass. Starting with fabric. This is a great technique to make a print you can actually take with you, like a piece of clothing or a bag, for example. More specifically, I want to make myself a personalized camera strap. One that displays some of the photographs and prints I've made in the recent years. But before we get into that, let's start with the types of fabric you can print on. Namely, natural fibers like cotton or linen. It does work best on flat pieces of fabric, So if you want to make yourself a camera strap, it's best to print the fabric before sewing everything together. For my prints, I like to use 100% cotton fabric. After marking my pieces with a lead pencil, I start by cutting them out using some scissors. As the edges are prone to fringing during the development process, I recommend making the pieces a bit bigger than you need. After that, it is time for coating the fabric. For the mixing of the Cyanotype chemicals, just follow the instruction on the packaging. After that, just use a sponge or brush to apply the emulsion onto the fabric. If you've done some Cyanotype printing before, you'll notice that printing on fabric does take quite a bit more emulsion than printing on paper. So, if like me, you didn't mix enough emulsion in the first place, don't worry. Just mix a bit more. But be careful not to contaminate the contents from bottle A with the contents from bottle B or vice versa. After coating the fabric with the Cyanotype emulsion, hang it up to dry in a dark place. Because only when the Cyanotype emulsion has dried, it becomes sensitive to light. Now, when your piece of fabric is completely dry, it's time for exposure. As I mentioned before, I want to make myself a personalized camera strap that displays some of the photographs and prints I've made in recent years. So I just went through my collection of transparencies and selected the ones I liked most. After I found the placement I liked, I placed 2 pieces of glass and some weights on top of it. This will squeeze everything together, giving us a nice and sharp print. To expose the print, I used my UV light source. If you don't have something like that, just place it out in the sun. You know that the print is ready for development when it displays a bronze-like color. Speaking of development, you can develop the piece of fabric just like a standard Cyanotype print in cold tap water. As the fabric was completely soaked with the chemicals, it might take a bit longer compared to a Cyanotype on paper. Just rinse the fabric until the white parts are truly white and you should be good. Now, although at this point I've made a beautiful piece of fabric, it's still not that different from a paper print. To change that, I used a sewing machine to turn it into a long sleeve that I could later use to cover my camera strap. Now, if, like me, you don't have that much experience using a sewing machine, this is the perfect beginner project. It only requires 3 straight seams to create something truly unique. After that, you're nearly done. There are only 2 steps remaining. First, turning the sleeve inside out, which, admittedly, took me quite some time. But with some patience and a wooden dowel, I did get it done. And after that, it finally came to putting the sleeve onto the camera strap. Again, this took me quite a bit longer than I expected, but I think it was worth it. And that's it. I believe after all that work, the camera strap turned out beautifully. Not only is it a very unique way of displaying a Cyanotype print, but also a great way of creating something useful using Cyanotype printing. Now you know how to print on fabric and paper. But there's still one way of printing left I haven't talked about. Printing on glass. To start with, I bought these very cheap picture frames to use their glass as a base for my prints. After that, it was time to mix the emulsion. To do so, I first measure and then mix my emulsion based on the instruction on the packaging. You can also use a Cyanotype kit that comes in one of these bottles This will save you some time and make the mixing a bit easier. In this case, I mixed 100 milliliters of emulsion. Now, if you have ever tried to do a cyanotype print on a smooth surface like coated canvas or metal or glass, you might have realized that it doesn't really work. You need something to make it stick. For that purpose, I'm going to use gelatin. If you want to try this yourself, make sure it doesn't have any additives like sugar or whitening. I mixed 20 grams of gelatin to my 100 milliliters of room temperature emulsion. Make sure the emulsion isn't too hot or otherwise you'll get clumps of gelatin. Here you can see the consistency that the cold emulsion should have. After having mixed everything, now it's time to heat up the mixture. I found the temperature of 40 or 45 degrees Celsius works best. Don't make it any hotter than that or it will ruin your emulsion. Now, it will start smelling a bit. However, the next step is the coating of the glass. To do that, I apply some emulsion to a plate of glass. Then proceed to move the plate slowly to create a very thin coating of gelatin. When I've achieved an even spread, I drain the emulsion. And that's it. Now, like with regular cyanotypes, you need to wait until the emulsion is completely dry. This might take anywhere between 30 minutes to a few hours, depending on the thickness of your coating and room temperature and other variables. When the emulsion is completely dry, you can now wipe away any stains you get on the back of the plate. As you can see, I don't handle the plate too carefully, but be aware that you don't want to get any water on the front of the plate or otherwise that might ruin your emulsion. After that, it is time for printing. I start by placing a piece of black paper below everything. On top of the paper, I place my coated piece of glass. In this case, I'm placing it with the coated side facing down. In retrospect, the other way around would have been a better call and made the image a bit sharper. However, I place my transparency like on a standard cyanotype and finish everything off by squeezing it together with a piece of glass and some pieces of steel. When it comes to exposure, I found that it takes a bit longer than a standard cyanotype. So instead of, let's say, 20 minutes, I'm going to expose the print for 30. Finally, I'm able to develop the print. I did handle it a bit more careful than I normally would with a paper cyanotype. However, I found that the glass print is actually quite a bit more robust than I had anticipated. And here it is. I believe after all that work it turned out rather nicely. It could be a bit sharper and use a composition that fits the medium a bit better, but besides that I'm quite happy. Now you know how to print on paper, fabric and even glass. But we are not done yet. There is still so much more you can do with cyanotype printing, so let me show you my favorite cyanotype techniques. Let's get going with the first technique, cyanotype shadowgram. This is a photogram, meaning a photograph made without ever involving a camera in the process. Now, photography without using a camera may sound incredibly stupid. Nonetheless, photograms are a very powerful tool to create an otherwise unachievable look. But let's start at the beginning. Some weeks ago I bought this book, Experimental Photography, a Handbook of Techniques. And to my surprise, the first chapter was entirely about techniques that didn't involve a camera. Most of them focused on practices related to darkroom printing, like explaining what a darkroom is or using an exposure test strip. But there was also a part about photograms, a technique where you place a transparent object onto light-sensitive material. By introducing a light source, like an enlarger for example, you're then able to capture the refractions created by the object. And although this process seems as easy as it gets, I failed quite a lot, but more of that later. Because captivated by the intriguing looks of these photograms, I wanted to try it myself. I started by looking for some interesting shaped glass to use as a subject, and going through some old cupboard I actually was able to find these really nice glasses. They were a bit dusty, so I rinsed them in some water, and after that they were perfectly suitable for creating a photogram. Having loads of angled surfaces and loads of detail in general, they would create really nice refractions. The only other thing I needed for a photogram was some light-sensitive material, and I chose to go with my favorite, or the only material I had available, Cyanotype paper. I cut out 2 stripes of watercolor paper and coated it in Cyanotype emulsion. The only thing left to do was to expose the whole arrangement, using my trusty old UV LED panel, or so I thought, because it absolutely did not work. These are just some of my failed test prints. Starting out, it didn't work at all. As you can see, there's only a very light discoloration of the paper in the area that has been covered by the glass. Thinking that the only thing wrong could be my light source, I changed it to this small UV LED. And lo and behold, it did look a lot more promising. Except after exposing, the paper was more or less completely white. The LED didn't have enough power. My next step would have been to try the sun, but even though it's August, the sky is completely grey. So I had to come up with something else. And the only solution I came up with was to build an UV enlarger. Yes, I built a whole enlarger. And here it is. Let me open it to explain how it works. To the left, there's a big 30-watt UV LED. The light then goes through these projector lenses to evenly light the slide you put in. After that, the light goes through the projector lens, which you can use to focus the image. Cooling is provided by the fan on the back, and all the electronics are located at the bottom. You can turn it off and on with a switch. So, after I built this thing, let me now show you how to create cyanotype photograms. As with every other cyanotype, you start by positioning your subject on your coated paper. After that, you position your light. If you want to get a photogram closely resembling your object, make sure the light source is angled straight onto your arrangement. But you can go beyond that. By positioning your light source at an angle towards your subject, you are able to create mesmerizing images. Only thing left to do is to switch on the light source and expose the paper to UV light. After 30 minutes or so, I was able to develop the prints. And while I'm doing that, I want to say that you can definitely also use the sun to create photograms. Just make sure it's a cloudless day. Experiment a bit with the exposure time and you're good to go. But let's look at our photograms. I believe after all that work, they turned out rather nicely. But let's continue with the next technique, toning cyanotype prints. Do cyanotype prints always have to be blue? Well, no. Today I'm going to show you how to get rid of the blue in cyanotype prints using only non-toxic household items. Now, when it comes to toning, you have several different options. You could use wine or coffee or tea or any other tannin-containing fluid. Today I'm going to use coffee and tea, as those are the ingredients I had the most success with before. To show you the whole process, I'm going to create a toned cyanotype print from scratch. I started by creating a normal blue print. To do that, I made 4 new digital negatives. I then printed them onto some transparent film. Quick tip: If you ever buy some transparent film to use with your inkjet printer, sometimes it can be hard to find the printable side. A small trick of mine is to use a highlighter of some kind and make a little marking on the transparency. If I'm able to wipe it away using my finger, the printable side is on the back. However, these are the negatives I printed. I then continued by exposing and developing my print. Before continuing to tone these prints though, it is important to wait around about 24 hours until the prints are fully developed. If you don't want to wait that long, you can also develop your print in a mild solution of hydrogen peroxide. But waiting is perfectly fine. Now that I've created the Cyanotype prints, let's take a look at the remaining materials needed to tone the cyanotype. First, you're going to need some kind of dish. I'm going to use these developing trays, but any kind of dish that's big enough for your print will work. The next thing you're going to need is a measuring cup and a couple of spoons, some washing soda, and, as mentioned before, tea or coffee. Now that I obtained all the necessary materials, it is time to prepare the toning baths. I'm going to fill the first developing tray with a solution of washing soda. To do that, I put 3 teaspoons of sodium into 1 liter of water. After mixing everything carefully, it's time for the next bath. This one is pretty simple. Just make 1 liter of very strong green tea. As you can see, I'm using 5 tea bags per liter here, so definitely don't want to drink that. The last tray I'm going to prepare is a tray filled with coffee. As I'm not going to drink the coffee either, I'm just going to put 4 tablespoons of coffee grind into 1 liter of hot water. Now that I've prepared everything, it's time to get into the actual toning process. The first step is to bleach the prints. To do that, I'm going to put them into the first tray filled with washing soda. As a little side note, this whole process does work a lot better with overexposed prints that are then bleached for longer rather than underexposed prints bleached for a shorter amount of time. Another side note, you don't have to mix a new solution for every print, but after some use the solution will turn yellow. This is a good indicator for when to mix a new solution of washing soda. After 3 to 5 minutes of bleaching, it is time to submerge the prints in either coffee or tea, depending on the color you want to achieve. After letting them sit for around about an hour, I rinse them in water. Speaking of the final reveal, here are the prints. I think they turn out rather nicely. Next time, I'm definitely going to overexpose them a bit more and be a bit more careful with the bleaching. This will give me a bit more contrast in the final image. But overall, I think this is a great way to expand my analog printing techniques without the need for any toxic or expensive chemicals. Moving on to the next technique, using masks in cyanotype printing. Last week I tried to create a surrealist photograph using cyanotype printing. And although I do like the pieces of the print on their own, I'm not quite happy with the compositing of the foreground elements onto the background. So this week I'll try a more advanced way of compositing. I'll try to use masks in cyanotype printing. And that way I'll be able to achieve a better sense of separation between my elements. The easiest way to understand how a mask works is by using one. For that, you only need 3 things: your background, your subject, and some paper. If you have all those things, the rest is gonna be easy. You start by cutting out a positive and a negative mask from your paper. In this example, I'm going to use this negative of a hand and a negative of the moon as our subjects. I used an X-Acto knife to cut out the hand and moon from some paper, giving me 4 masks, 2 positive, 2 negative. So let me show you how I place them on the coated paper. I start by placing my background elements. In this case, I'm going to use these leaves. After that, I'm going to place the positive masks onto the paper. In that way, the paper won't get exposed in the areas where I later want to have my foreground. After arranging everything to my liking, now it's time for the first exposure. As always, you could use the sun, but I'm going to use my little box here. After my first exposure, I now remove everything I placed on the paper before. As you can see, the paper has been very lightly exposed even under the areas covered by the mask. Even though this isn't visible in the final print, next time I'm going to use thicker paper or cardboard just to be sure. I continue by placing my subjects onto the coated paper. I'm going to cover the background with the negative masks I cut out before. Any excess space that isn't covered by those masks, I cover with scraps of paper. Make sure the background is covered completely, otherwise it won't be visible in the final print. Now it's time for the second exposure. Try to get the same amount of UV light onto the subjects as onto the background. This will ensure equal colors between them. After the exposure, you can develop the paper like a standard cyanotype print. And here we have our final print. As you can see, the alignment of the masks wasn't perfect. Next time, I'm probably gonna use sticky tape to keep them in place. But nonetheless, I think you can see that there's definitely a greater sense of separation between our elements. This can be seen especially if you look at a comparison between a print that has been done without masks and a print that's been done with masks. Although I need to say that in this particular case, I do like the one without using masks more. Let's get going with using gold leaf on Cyanotype Prints. This technique is exactly what it says. By combining your Cyanotype print with gold leaf, you are able to create something truly astonishing. Start with a fully developed print. Next step is to paint on some special kind of glue in the areas where you later want to have gold leaf. Follow the instructions on the packaging of your glue for the best results. In my case, I have to wait until it is completely dry before applying the gold. I'm using faux gold leaf here, and in hindsight, this was the right call, because it is a great way to practice before getting into the expensive real stuff. However, after a bit of fiddling around, here's the result of this technique. Now, you might wonder how I achieve the red base cyanotype print. Well, that's our fifth and final technique, combining China ink and cyanotype printing. This technique is truly great at creating a large variety of different colored prints. And on top of that, it is quite easy. All you have to do is to cover your watercolor paper with a layer of China ink. After letting the ink dry, you then apply the cyanotype emulsion afterwards. You will realize that the emulsion won't stick as well to the paper as it does without the ink, so it will take quite a bit longer to dry. However, when it is completely dry, you can expose it like a standard cyanotype print. Be a bit careful when developing though, as there is a risk of washing away even the exposed parts of the print. And that's it. Everything I've learned in 5 years of cyanotype printing. If you have any other questions, be sure to let me know in the comments. Other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this video and maybe found something interesting or inspiring. If you want to learn even more about extended photographic techniques, you can watch the videos on screen now. Until then, see you next video.